Mr. Steve Bogaerts. We're real happy to have him. And so a little bit about Steve. He's a world-renowned cave diver, instructor, and explorer, and inventor of the Razor side mount system. He's originally from Britain, but you've been residing in Mexico for a number of years. So say hello to everyone.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invite, Joe. Happy to be here. Nice to talk with you, and hopefully it'll be interesting for the people listening.
Yeah. So we're real excited to have you on. You know, we've seen some awesome video footage of you diving on the side mount Liberty, and you know I've been following a lot of your content and for years on social media, on YouTube and stuff. So especially when we were kind of developing the Razor harness system. So I've been a big fan. So, well, great. So, you know, just to kind of kick things off, could you tell us a little bit about your kind of background in early days of diving and how you got into technical diving?
Okay, sure. You want to start all the way back at the beginning?
Sure. I mean, yeah, why not? Okay. We got lots of time.
So I've pretty much been like a water person my whole life. I've always been really happy and comfortable in and around water. So from a very young age, you know, I was like really keen on swimming and stuff like that. I actually started swimming competitively and joined a team when I was about 8 years old, and did that for a number of years. And actually, one of my coaches at the swim team, he was a scuba diver, which was quite unusual at that time in the UK. There just weren't that many around. And I remember he turned up at one of the pool sessions and he just chucked his scuba kit in the pool, and we could all swim around with that and have a go on that. I guess I was about 12 or 13 years old at the time. So that was really my first exposure to scuba. No instruction whatsoever. No idea what I was doing apart from just swimming around underwater, holding on to this like BCG and regulator, and thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. I really didn't do anything much more with it for quite a number of years, and I was actually fairly late entry into scuba diving. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but you know, finding the time, having the money to pursue it, and everything else wasn't something that I was able to do until I was quite a bit older. So around about the age of 25, my girlfriend at the time, she wanted to take a vacation, asked me where I wanted to go. I said, I don't care where we go, just as long as I can learn to scuba dive while I'm there. And we went to the Maldives, and I actually did my PADI open water and an advanced open water course out in the Maldives, which was just fantastic. And pretty much from the first dive, pretty much from the first dive, I was hooked. I mean, like confined water one was out on the House Reef. I mean, I saw sharks and stingrays and moray eels, so I was spoilt from dive number one. And as soon as I got back to the UK, I was just like, okay, where's the nearest dive shop? I need to carry on with this. And I actually found a good dive shop close to me, Wimbledon Divers, Wimbledon Dive Centre, and I started diving with them. And within a year, actually, I racked up somewhere in the region of like 400 dives.
Wow.
And started down the road to become an instructor, and I became a PADI instructor pretty much sort of like within a year and a half of my first ever dive.
You're just blazing through.
Yeah, I mean, it just became an obsession, to be honest. So at that point, I basically transitioned completely into diving, and I was working full time at a dive centre in Croydon called Scuba Doos, which my friends who had been working at Wimbledon Dive Centre moved and set up a dive centre, another dive centre close by, and I started working there. And then I did all my instructor certifications through IAND at the time, International Association of Nitrox Divers. It later became IATD, and also ANDI, the Association of Nitrox Divers International, which I don't think is around anymore. And I did all my sort of technical instructor certifications through those two organizations over the next couple of years. And a couple of years after that, I actually started diving CCR with Buddy Inspiration rebreather made by AP Valves, which was kind of the first commercially available rebreather for the recreational market, and became an instructor on that around about 97, I believe.
Wow. So yeah, quite a while. You really did become an obsession for you. And so
no, absolutely. it was something that just fit me perfectly. It was something that I love to do, and it doesn't matter where I was diving, whether it was warm water, cold water, wreck diving, cave diving. I just like being underwater. I love diving, and I love everything to do with diving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, I know for me, I mean, it was just time spent in the water. It didn't matter if it was in a pool. It doesn't matter if it was in a black water pond, or in a beautiful spring here. I was just happy underwater. So I think the real kind of equipment orientedness of diving is just what really appeals to people, and then the environment and floating and everything. So it really
absolutely. I was definitely interested in the equipment, but just that sensation, of being neutrally buoyant underwater in this sort of like three-dimensional environment, that's pretty cool. And just trying to, become a better diver, and then particularly in the UK, there's a lot of wreck diving. So I was quite into wreck diving in my early diving days, and I particularly liked sort of like doing wreck penetration dives, things like that. So that was something that I got a lot of fun and enjoyment out of. And diving conditions in the UK are fairly challenging. Very often it's cold water, it's rough weather, poor visibility, strong currents. So it was a good foundation, to be honest, because if you're comfortable in that environment, you can be comfortable pretty much diving anywhere in the world, to be honest.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I used to tell a lot of my students when we go dive in Texas in little Offutt's Bayou. You can't see your hand, but it made great divers. And then
absolutely,
they're so excited to see their feet, and so then they can handle most problems. So it's really good. It's a good way to start.
Yeah.
Now, you've been such a fundamental player in developing kind of the modern style of side mount diving. When you talk about you really appeal to the neutral buoyancy, the kind of free floating, you really showed that in a lot of your videos and the way that you were diving. And so I know that was like the coolest thing, because it looked like you weren't wearing anything. And kind of the older videos of your side mount diving, it was just like, it was very graceful. And so what are your kind of like, how did you develop your side mount system and your style of diving side mount?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, because I've actually been diving side mount for quite a long time before I developed the razor system. So I actually started diving side mount in the UK, because around about, it would have been around about 94, 95, something like that.
I was doing side mount started in the UK.
Well, no, side mount started way before that in the UK. The side mount has been around since the 60s. With divers doing cave diving in places like Wookey Hole and stuff like that. So, but around about 94, 95, I started doing some sump diving and some mine diving. And to be honest, completely sort of like self-taught, in that I was obviously a certified diver, but I didn't have any training as a cave diver or anything of that nature. And I just sort of made myself a very basic harness that I put over my dry suit. No kind of buoyancy control device. Didn't really need it. Had enough lift on the dry suit. Just diving with two very small steel tanks, because most of the sumps and the mines were fairly shallow, and the dives weren't particularly long. Cold water, 4 to 6 degrees centigrade. So what's that in Fahrenheit? Around about 39, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Typically on the way in, visibility would be excellent. And then just because of percolation and everything, when you turn around to come back out, it would literally be zero visibility the whole way back out. So again, just being comfortable in that type of environment, cold water, poor vis, again, it's a good foundation for everything else you do later on. And I did actually want to take some formal cave diver training, but there wasn't much available in those days, particularly not in the UK. The CDG were around, but they were based in northern England, and I was in the south. And you had to be a member of a dry caving club for 2 years, and you had to be recommended and seconded. There was a whole process or rigmarole to go through to get onto the CDG books and be able to do training with them. So I was looking around to do training, and I was considering going up to Florida, actually, because that was pretty much the only place I knew in the world where, there was an active cave diving scene, where you could go cave diving, where you could get training and everything else. And I read an article in Aquacore magazine, one of the first technical diving magazines on the market. About it was all about the cave wars in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. And it was an article that was talking about the exploration of Nohoch-Nachich and Dos Ojos. And that was being done by two competing cave teams, one of them being led by Mike Madden Cedam Dive Center, and the other being led by Steve Gerard, Nancy, and Tony DeRosa of Villa DeRosa. So I thought, hey, you know what? I can go to the States anytime. I've been there before, but this sounds like the new frontier. This sounds like really cutting edge. Yeah, they had photographs which just looked amazing. And I contacted Cedam and I contacted DeRosa's, and it was actually DeRosa, for whatever reason, didn't reply. And Cedam did. So I went out there, which was 98, and did my cave training in Backmount through the NSS CDS with a guy called Dan Lins, who was a very active explorer in Mexico at that time. And literally from my very first dive, which was in Ponderosa, which everyone who has ever been in Mexico knows Ponderosa very well. Oh, yeah. It's a training cave, but it's just an amazing place. And I remember my first dive there, diving through the halocline, it just blew me away. And I was like, okay, I have to come back here. I have to move back to Mexico, and I have to do more of this. And so
that's what they do to you. That's why I stay away.
Yeah, it's addictive. You know, they say that cave diving is dangerous, and it is, not because you're likely to die going cave diving, but because it's going to change your life, and it's going to lead to serious life decisions that can pull you away from friends and family and well-paying jobs, and you end up living in Mexico and being a dive bum, like I was for more than 20 years. So I actually moved back to Mexico like 1 year later, full time at that point. Initially I intended to be there a year maybe, and then I planned to carry on sort of like maybe exploring some other places in the world. And I ended up, I'm still there 20 years later. So
that's how it goes. It's like, I'll just be there for a little bit, not too long, then I'll go back to my job and work hard, then a year, 2 years, and then, yeah.
So when I actually traveled out to Mexico, at the time I had two Buddy Inspiration CCRs, and I took them with me, and I was supporting myself by training people on the CCR and by doing technical training. I wasn't a cave instructor at the time. So cave diving for me was just my passion. That's what I was doing when I had a day off. And then when I was working, I was teaching technical diving, CCR diving, that kind of thing. And so I was teaching a lot of the local cave instructors to dive on the CCR. And then they were sort of like taking me exploring as well. So it was like, that was really cool. So I got to do a lot of great exploration with Dan Lins, with Bill Phillips, with a number of
other. It's a great way to get into that community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was definitely sort of like a two-way mentorship in that I was training them on the rebreathers, and they were teaching me a lot more about sort of like cave diving and exploration and everything else. Now, at that time, most of the cave diving that was being done in Mexico was all backmount doubles. But the hardcore of explorers were diving in side mount. And really because logistically it made things a lot easier, a lot simpler, and particularly carrying tanks through the jungle and everything else. And because you never knew what you were going to find when you're exploring a new site. It might be a big cave, but it might have a restricted opening, or it might have restrictions during the dive, where in backmount it would be difficult to pass, but side mount obviously gave you a lot more versatility, a lot more flexibility. So although when I was sort of like teaching or guiding, I was mostly doing that in backmount in those early days, all of my own personal diving, all of my exploration stuff was in side mount. And at the time, I was actually diving in a Dive Right Transpac harness. I believe that Dive Right came out with that around about 98. And since the shop I worked for in the UK was a Dive Right dealer, I got my hands on a Transpac harness like really early on. And that was kind of like the first off-the-peg piece of equipment that was designed for side mount diving, or could be adapted for side mount diving. And I dived with that for a number of years with a number of different types of wing, and it worked pretty well. And then later on, I think around about 2004, I got a prototype armadillo from Kurt Bowen. The armadillo was originally designed by Brett Hemphill. And he was at DEMA, and he had an armadillo with him. And I'm like, I want it. And he goes, well, you can't have that one. It's the only one we've got, and I need it for the show. I went, okay, on the end of the show, on the last day, I'll pay for it. Just give it to me. Yeah. And so I got the armadillo, and it was the one with the door handles on it. I mean, they were door handles. That's where they come from. Yeah, but again, you could see, just like with the Dive Right Transpac, which had been sort of designed by Lamar Hires, who was the side mount diver himself, and kind of knew like what was required from a piece of equipment. The same with the Armadillo. Brett Hemphill was an active explorer, active side mount diver, and you could see that he brought his experience and knowledge to the table, and like he'd produced something that was suitable for side mount diving. And I dove with, first of all, the Transpac for a number of years, and then later on with the Armadillo, and they both served me really, really well. Around about 2004, I started exploring with Robbie Schmittner in Sakaktoon, and we were attempting to make a connection between Sakaktoon and Nahotchna-Cheech, which at the time were the second and third longest underwater caves in the world, Oshkosh being number one. And so we were doing a lot of diving in super small, very restricted areas of the cave. And I was running into the limitations of my equipment at that point in time. And I was getting hung up a lot. I was getting stuck a lot. And I was destroying my equipment as well. I mean, I was just tearing it to pieces. And I was actually running out side mount equipment to dive with. And necessity being the mother of invention, I basically had to sit down and design a side mount harness that would work for the type of diving that I was doing at that period in time. And that basically was the birth of the Razor harness. So I kind of just went straight back to fundamentals and just wrote a wish list of all the things that I wanted. And I wanted to just basically keep it as simple and easy to use as possible, just to make my life as easy as possible, because the dives I was doing were fairly extreme, so they were testing me to my limits. But I didn't want the equipment to make my life even harder, which at that point it was doing. And once I actually sort of like came up with a prototype for the Razor, started diving it just simplified and streamlined everything so much, and it made things so much easier for me. And over the next couple of years, I was constantly refining it, and it evolved. And not just the side mount harness, but also, the tanks I was using, the valves that I had on the tanks, the way the tanks were set up, the way I was attaching the tanks to my body, the regulators I was using, the hose routing for the regulators, all of that changed dramatically. So even though I've been diving side mount for 10 years up to that point in my life, and I felt that I actually had a good handle on it, I knew what I was doing, that 2 years of sort of like innovation and experimentation, I feel that I just learned a huge amount about diving in general, more specifically about side mount diving, and it actually made me a much better, much more knowledgeable diver, and it improved my skills and it improved my diving, and it allowed me to do dives that I never ever would have been able to do without making those changes along the way.
I've heard you say before that, kind of this developing of this system, which is kind of been nicknamed the Bogaertian system, right?
Sure.
It's a holistic kind of approach of a very simplified side mount system, because side mount can get complicated because you can think of what different lengths of hoses and whatnot for this, but you're catering to the caves that you're diving in the Yucatan, in which they're very intricate. They're really in common with like the Bahamas, where they have so many formations, but they're also very shallow. And so it's your environment and your type of diving started developing your harness, your system, but you looked at the big picture system. And then
the idea was that just as it happened in back mount diving, I mean, you're probably aware of William Hogarth Main and Hogarthian style diving. And so what Bill Main did was he took what at the time was like, there was lots of different ways to set up your back mount gear, and he just simplified it. And I mean, his philosophy was really sort of like simplify everything as much as possible and come up with a really clean, easy to use, simple configuration. And I had that mindset where when I applied it to my side mount harness, that I wanted something that was really no frills, that I didn't want lots of bells and whistles. I didn't want lots of extraneous stuff that would just get in my way, to be honest. I wanted something that was as minimalist and simple and easy to use as possible. And that's really where the name The Razor came from. The idea was that I just cut everything off that I didn't need. And I just kept paring it down, cutting things off, cutting it off, until I got down to just the core of what I needed. And the Razor harness was the core of the system, but I had a very holistic view about how everything else should fit around it. And the idea being that it's a modular system and everything fits on top of that core, but nothing changes. You just keep adding things to it as you need them. But everything has to be integrated and everything has to work as a whole or complete system. So it's very important, you know, not just the harness, but also how you set up the tanks, how you set up the regulators, you know, where you have your light situated, where you have your reels, where you have your pouch. All of those things were critical as well. And so there were so many things with the harness that, you know, there's a reason for every single thing I did with the Razor harness, which a lot of people probably are not aware about. But it, you know, I went into sort of like very far down the rabbit hole and thought very deeply about what I needed. And then I'll go out and dive it, because that's always the best test, because you can have great ideas on the surface or in theory, and you take it in the water and you're like, oh my God, that's just, it works brilliantly. Or alternatively, oh my God, what a disaster. I didn't expect that at all. Back to the drawing board. You know, and both of those things happened to me. So I had some fantastic dives, which were pure eureka moments.
Right?
Exactly. But I also had some terrible dives, which were like, oh, that was just didn't go in anything at all like I expected. And I just need to completely revise that. So that's why over that 2-year period, a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, really sort of like refined the system to like a very high degree. And this was real world diving as well. I mean, I was taking it out and I was going exploring, and I was exploring in a very, very challenging environment. I was doing a lot of no mount and very small cave diving at the time. And I felt that if it worked for that, it was going to work for all the rest of the diving that I wanted to do. I remember probably one of my best eureka moments was finding a buoyancy device to marry to the Razor harness, because when I originally designed the Razor harness, it had no buoyancy. It was just literally a harness that went over my wetsuit. And I was doing all of my buoyancy just with breath control alone, which worked fine, you know, with 2 aluminium 80s. But anything more than that, and you're going to be struggling. Luckily, I have a pretty good lung capacity, so I could cope with the buoyancy change from 2 aluminium 80s. But anything more, if you want to add stages, doesn't really work too well anymore. And even with 280s and no buoyancy, you have to be very, very on point with your weighting and with your trim and everything else to make sure that that works. And so I was kind of thinking, you know, I'd like to add some stages to this, but I don't want to put like a BCD or, you know, like a wing on top of it and just ruin the streamlined simplicity of the Razor harness. And I was sort of like thinking about it for a while, and I was cleaning out my bodega one day, and I was going through all my jungle gear, and I pulled out a Camelback that I was just using as hydration when I'm hiking in the jungle. And I'm like, it's watertight, so it should be airtight. So maybe that will work. So I just strapped it around my waist with a bit of bungee cord, jumped in the open water Ponderosa, swam around with a Camelback around my waist, and that was a pure eureka moment. It worked brilliantly as a buoyancy device. It was like 2 liters in capacity, which was just enough to dive comfortably with 2 side mount tanks plus a stage. And so that was fantastic. The only problem was all the strange looks I would get from people at the dive site. They're like, where's the rest of your equipment? And why are you taking drinks in the water with you? I'm pretty sure that most people thought I was an alcoholic, and that I had like my Camelback full of like beer or whiskey or something, and that I was just getting smashed while I was diving. I'm like, no, it's my BCD. And they're just like, you're insane.
I remember seeing that in videos, and I see you pull out, or you had the little bite, and I was like, that's a Camelback. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was diving with a Camelback as a buoyancy device for probably at least a year, maybe slightly longer. Actually, HP Hartman, who did his cave training with me, and then around about 2007, he did his side mount training with me. He was kind of struggling with buoyancy because the 2-liter Camelback didn't provide enough lift for him. So he did a little bit of research, and he found the MSR dromedary bags.
Oh, he used the big one.
Yeah, and so they are actually better made and a lot more rugged than the Camelbacks, and they also come in a better range of sizes. I think they got from like 4 liters all the way up to 10 or 12 liters or something. Exactly. So he actually got one of those and started trying it out, and I tried it as well. I'm like, wow, this is way better than the Camelback. And so we switched over to the MSR Dromedary bags. That was much better. The only downside to the MSR Dromedary bags is it probably delayed us actually designing a proper side mount specific wing for a number of years, with a proper power inflator and all the rest of it.
We liked it so much.
Because the MSR Dromedary bag works so well. I remember saying to HP when we were designing like the first Razor wing, I'm like, yeah, we'll design this thing so we can sell these things to people. I'm using my Dromedary bag because I love it so much.
That's
but that
hilarious.
was okay, because, to be honest, like most people, I'm extremely lazy. So the first time I jumped in the water with the Razor wing and I was like, okay, I want to adjust my buoyancy, press the power inflator button. I was like, okay, that's so nice. I don't have to bother already inflating it anymore. So for sure, the MSR Dromedary bag went pretty quickly. But the thing is that there's still the evolution, or you can see the origin of the Razor wing, because the Razor wing is a 2-compartment wing. It's actually a redundant wing, and it still has one section of the wing which you can orally inflate. So if something goes wrong with your power inflator, or if you put a hole in your primary wing, then you still have a backup wing with the same lift capacity as the primary wing that you can actually orally inflate, just as you could with the Camelback or the MSR Dromedary bag. And so that was another philosophy I had all the way through, which was make things extremely simple, try and reduce their complexity as much as possible to eliminate potential failure points, and build as much safety and redundancy into the system as possible as well.
Yeah, we had the Camelback right there. So, I mean, you can see it's a bladder. And so, just turn that cap into an OPV and there you go.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, there's still people diving now with MSR Dromedary bags with their side mount rigs. And if you're just diving with 2 tanks or something, and you don't have a huge amount of buoyancy swing, or you're not diving with very heavy cylinders like steel cylinders, works perfectly.
Yeah, especially, in the Yucatan, I mean, there's so many, it's predominantly aluminum 80s are around. So those are the most common tanks to get. So versus, in North Florida, like we're trying to get the bigger steel tanks that we can get. So
yeah, which makes complete sense because, it's cold water diving, so everyone's wearing dry suits. So having that the extra ballast from the tanks helps, with weighting. And also the caves are deeper. So having a larger gas volume is helpful as well. So steel tanks in that environment make complete sense, just as wetsuits and aluminium tanks make complete sense in Mexico, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
So horses for courses, choose the right tool for the right environment and the right job that you're doing. And people sometimes get too fixated with there is only one way to do something, and that's that is the methodology that you apply in all environments, all circumstances. And I've always been of the mindset that what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and optimize my equipment configuration, my skills and procedures based on the environment I'm diving in, and also what it is that I'm actually doing while I'm underwater. And the key thing for me is simplicity. Keep things as simple as possible, because that makes it easy to dive and easy to correct problems. And you're less likely to have problems if you have easy to use systems which are simple. The more complex you make things, the more inherent potential failure points you have. And if you do have a failure, maybe the more difficult it is to redress those failures as well. So certainly I'm pretty lazy. So I just want to make my life as easy as possible. And that's always been my goal.
Divers are the laziest people. We use scooters. We want to have the simple gear,
If I wasn't lazy, I'd be a dry caver, but I'm way too lazy to be a dry caver. All that crawling and climbing and everything else. No, come on. I want to float neutrally buoyant through the cave system and look at all the pretty stuff without any of the exertion or hard work that those guys go through.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. No, dry caving's a lot of work. So
it's fun. I've done some, but as I said, I much prefer being a lazy cave diver than like a hard-working dry caver.
That's fun. Yeah. In like speaking of like technology and getting, just how much things have changed in the last 10 years, it's it's allowing us to go farther and farther and easier, batteries, now rebreathers. And do you think it's an evolution of the sport, or would you say or is it just kind of like a repetition of almost like a habit of you're going to see people doing too much too quickly and they'll run into problems, or it's just you're going to have a lot more people using DPVs and rebreathers and going to the back of the cave now? Or is it like a progress or a problem?
I think that the sport is always evolving. Equipment is always evolving. It's always changing. Honestly, it's getting better. I mean, if you think about the stuff that we have access to and that we're using today compared with what was available 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is night and day. So that opens up a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity. But the human inside all that equipment is still the same. And so it's very, very important to build up your experience gradually. So it's great to have all these fancy toys and all this new kit and everything else. And for sure, it does help us to become better divers, to be able to do dives that we probably wouldn't be able to do without all this stuff. But ultimately, when the shit hits the fan, if you do not have a lot of experience under your belt, then you're not going to react appropriately in that situation. So I actually think that just as the equipment's evolved, just as diving's evolved, so is instruction. I think instruction is better now than it was 10 years ago, and or even more so 20 years ago. So I in general, I think the knowledge has increased, instruction is better, equipment is better, and those are all good things. But I do caution people to actually take their time and progress through each level of training gradually. And when you complete a level of training, the idea is to stop at that level and dive. So you've been given tools, they've opened a door for you, you've got tools and they've opened a door, and now is the time to consolidate those tools and go out and just get some real world diving experience by yourself, not under the direct control and supervision of an instructor, because that makes things different as well. And then when you've racked up a certain number of dives, it might be 50 or 100 dives at that new level of training, maybe more depending on what level it's at, then think about doing the next level of training. So the only problem I see in diving today, and to be honest, that's always a problem we've had, it's not new, it was around 20 or 30 years ago, is people who race through the levels of certification. They're more interested in a certification card than they are in the training they're receiving and how to put that training to use. So for myself, as an instructor, I would actually tell my students, you can't come back and take another course from me until you've got a certain number of dives under your belt, until you've shown me that you've put into practice all the things that I've taught you at this level of training. And then you can come back to me in a year's time or 2 years' time when you have another 100 dives and you've consolidated the lessons that I had to teach you, and then you're going to be ready for the next level of training. Otherwise, it's wasted on you. You're going to have some inherent weaknesses and flaws that are only going to become apparent in a stressful situation. But that's when it's most important, because then it can be a life or death situation. And to be honest, how you react to a situation depends not just on the training you've received, but also how much that you've practiced what you've been taught, but also how much experience you've built up gradually over a period of time, constantly exposing yourself to slightly more complex dives, or you're pushing your boundaries a little bit each time, rather than taking sort of like a big step outside your level of experience and training. So I think maybe in the old days, because training was harder to come by, because information was harder to come by, it took people longer to progress, because it was difficult to do so. Now, with the internet, with online training, with forums, with social media, with the number of instructors that are available and everything else, I guess that information is out there, which is a good thing, but it has to be tempered with the realization that you only become a better diver by actually getting in the water and going diving and building up your time in the water and your hours underwater, and having good and bad experiences while you dive. To be honest, I've always learned far more on the dives where something has gone wrong, rather than the dives where everything went perfectly. And that's the other thing. You need to be self-reflective, and after every dive, you should do a post-dive critique. Whether you do that with the rest of your dive team, or whether you just do that yourself and think about, okay, what was good about that dive? What can I repeat next time? What didn't quite go so well? And what can I change? So, every dive that you do is a learning experience. And for sure, if you have an experienced eye looking at you, such as an instructor, while you're taking a course, who can give you really good input, everything else. That's important. But it's also, you have some responsibility to yourself to actually go out and consolidate your skills at every level of training that you get to.
Failure is, it's a good teacher, but it's a harsh teacher. And
well, it's part of life, right? I mean, like the whole point, you're going to have lots of failures in life, and it's not so much how you sort of like deal with the failure. It's how you sort of pick yourself up afterwards and continue on and learn from it. And the idea is to try as much as possible and learn from our mistakes and not repeat them. And I mean, I've made hundreds of mistakes over my diving career. And I don't mind making mistakes so long as they're new mistakes. I beat myself up a bit if I repeat the same mistakes. But if I'm making new mistakes and I feel like I'm learning something, so that's good, that's positive. I learned something on that dive because I made a mistake, I screwed up or whatever, and I can correct that. Because a lot of times, as you progress to the levels of diving, you're not even going to be aware of potential hazards or potential mistakes that you could possibly make until they actually happen to you. So you can have extremely thorough training from the best instructors, but until you actually go out there and do it for yourself, then you're relying on other people's experience rather than building up that experience base yourself.
Find that everything goes okay, and then then you learn when it doesn't. So there's been a couple of folks have been saying hello. So Javier and Mike Menduno, they say hello, and then it looks like Kyle has a question.
Okay.
Steve, as someone who's primarily dove back mount currently, I see side mount as the horizon as a tool I'd like to add for smaller caves. There's so much stuff out there. Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as a magic carpet in diving. So, I'm not evangelist. I don't know how you say that word. But there's lots of different ways of diving. So you might be diving back mount open circuit or back mount closed circuit. You may be diving side mount open circuit or side mount closed circuit or whatever configuration you're using. And they're all fine. So long as you are comfortable, so long as you feel safe, so long as it works for the type of diving you're doing and the environment you're in, perfect. Now, I actually think side mount is a great tool for certain types of diving or for certain divers. So again, it might be that someone's fairly small and they struggle diving with a set of back-mounted doubles, or they may have some kind of existing injury, back injury in particular, for example. I know a lot of people prefer to dive side mount because they have back injuries and diving back-mounted doubles is uncomfortable for them. As far as environments go, then obviously if you're diving in cave, particularly small cave, then side mount makes a lot of sense from the point of view of actually just being able to fit through the cave. You can dive pretty small cave in back mount if you are skilled enough, but for sure, if that's your intention, if at some point you want to go cave diving, then side mount gives you, greater redundancy, greater levels of safety, and it gives you the option to actually get into smaller areas of the cave, or if you're doing wreck penetration, the same thing. As far as where to start, then you start with a basic side mount course, and that should be taught in the open water. You should not be in the cave environment until you've mastered the equipment configuration that you're diving in. So if you're already an experienced open water diver, that's no problem, that's great. Even if you're not an experienced open water diver, you can start doing an open water side mount course, which should teach you all the basics of side mount diving. And once you've done that, and once you've get comfortable in that equipment configuration, then you can consider maybe doing some cave training in side mount configuration. If you're already a cave diver, if you're certified as a back mount cave diver, for example, but you've never dived side mount, then you have to go back to basics. You have to do a basic side mount open water course. You have to get comfortable in side mount configuration in the open water before you go into the cave. Trying to learn completely new equipment configuration, new protocols, new skills and procedures in a challenging environment like a cave is tantamount to disaster. Things can go very quickly wrong and you could end up possibly paying for that with your life. But in addition, the chances are that you're just going to do a lot of damage in the cave as well. So the idea from both a safety point of view and a conservation point of view is that we do all of our training in the open water. When we're competent, comfortable and confident with our equipment configuration, then we can start going into the overhead environment and actually learning how to transfer those skills into the overhead environment. because again, there are some differences between diving side mount in the open water to diving side mount inside an overhead environment. And obviously you need to learn that as well. So you've got lots of different skill sets going on here. I mean, you've got, a diving skill set, you've got side mount skill set, and you've got cave diving skill set. Those are all different things. Then if you add CCR into the mix, then you've got a CCR skill set as well. Mm-hmm. So now you're talking about 4 levels of diving, and it takes some time to master all of those. And again, coming back to your early point, sometimes people want to do too much, too quickly, too soon, and they're racing to get through all this stuff. And they're probably diving beyond the level of their comfort, their experience, and their ability to deal with a problem or emergency should it arise. But the equipment allows them perhaps to do these dives. And 99 times out of 100, nothing's going to go wrong. That gives them a false sense of security. Unfortunately, when something does go wrong, they just don't have the fundamental experience, knowledge, and technique to be able to deal with it effectively. At the very least, the cave is going to suffer. At the worst, they're possibly going to pay for it with their lives, or maybe even kill somebody else.
Yeah, and then throw a dry suit in there.
Well, exactly. Any new piece of equipment. Exactly. I mean,
it all builds, and so.
Yeah, I mean, the first time you learn to dive a dry suit, you don't really want to be out in the open water. You should be in a pool or a confined water site, and you learn how to dive the dry suit, and then you just do some gradual build-up dives, and after that, you go back to, maybe doing the more challenging dives that you're doing previously. But, if you're a mixed gas diver, but you've never dived a dry suit before, you don't want to be down at 90 meters using a dry suit for the first time in your life, because that's possibly going to go extremely badly for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Good words on that. It's a progressive, and you have to enjoy the trip as you're growing and you're diving. I know. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, what's important? Is it the destination that's important? Is it getting that C card that's important for me? Certification cards have never been important. As a diver myself, or even as an instructor, I certification cards, okay, it's an acknowledgement that you reached a certain level, but that's all it is. The journey is far more important. The trip to get there. So, you really want to get the most out of your training. So that's the other thing. I don't understand people who want to do the training as quickly as possible. They want to take the shortest route to get to that endpoint, to that destination, because the training actually should be something that's fun, that challenges you, where you learn something, that opens up new opportunities and new doors for you, and actually makes you a much, much better diver. So to be honest, you want to perhaps extend that training as much as possible. And then when you actually get to that level where someone says, okay, I actually think you can plan and execute a safe dive at this level of certification, whatever it is, then you should go out and actually do that without thinking about moving up to the next level of training too quickly. You should just gain some experience first.
Exactly. And it's, when you get to the end goal, a lot of times you find it's like, okay, I'm here. And then if you didn't enjoy the ride, it's very anticlimactic. It's very like, okay. And so,
yeah, exactly. Anticipation and enjoying the journey is the key. And for me, my diving career was a very long and very enjoyable journey. And for sure, I had goals along the way and certain sort of like destinations that I wanted to get to. But to give you a clear example, one of the things that I dedicated 2 or 3 years of my life to, and was a very much a driving force and a motivating factor behind my exploration, was making the connection between Saskatoon and Nahotchnacheech. And the day that we made that connection felt fantastic, floating on cloud 9, and probably for the next few days afterwards. But then the realization hit me that this goal I've been working towards for the last 3 years was over. And actually I was depressed.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, what now? Like, I need a new goal. And happily we had a new goal, which was to try and make the connection between Saskatoon and Dos Ojos. So that was the next thing to move on to. But very much so. I mean, sometimes reaching your goals can actually be, as you say, very anticlimactic. You've got to enjoy the journey. You've got to enjoy the path along the way, because once you've reached the goal, now you need something else to aim for. Now you need something else to go and do. So be careful what you wish for, because you might get it.
You got to set them really high, right? Unattainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Set really, really high goals. And I did, and I knew that I wouldn't achieve many of them, but I had a lot of fun along the way trying to get there. I mean, one of the things that I always told people, told all my students and everything else, is I'm always trying to do the perfect dive. I never ever made the perfect dive. I knew I was never ever going to do the perfect dive, but I had a lot of fun always trying to improve as a diver and always, trying to get better. And it did make me a much, much better diver. And like everything, there's levels to this stuff. So perhaps what I thought of as being a good diver 10, 15, 20 years ago is completely different to what I think of being a good diver now, because you reach a point in your diving career where all of a sudden, a whole new vista opens up to you, like stuff you didn't even know existed. And you're like, okay, wow, I've been sort of like hitting this barrier for quite a long time. And now I've reached it. All of a sudden, there's this whole new world that I didn't even know existed. And I realize how much I still have left to learn.
And that, it's like that brings me to like rebreathers, and kind of using them as a tool. And, they're such a fantastic tool. And it's not something that you should force yourself into, but it's something that you can, once you grow into it, it's a new world. It's relearning diving. It's relearning cave diving. And so it's completely different. And, you have worked with your rebreathers as exploration. And, you've done some really interesting work with the side mount Liberty. And, I know, 5 years ago, you'd have to build a side mount rebreather if you wanted one. And so, the idea that folks are getting into side mount rebreathers now, it's just like, I think to me, that's kind of mind blowing, because they were kind of like an impossible thing. And now I see them everywhere.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, again, it's great that we've got this technology available to us now. But I think that the more experience you have, the more in-depth knowledge you have, the better you can use that technology, and the safer you're going to be while you use that technology. As I said to you, I first started diving closed-circuit rebreathers around about 96, 97. So that's more than sort of like 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I used them. In the UK, they were great because it's cold water diving. A lot of it's deep mixed gas wreck diving, so perfect tool for that type of environment. And when I first moved to Mexico, as I said, I brought the two rebreathers with me, and I was teaching a lot of the local cave instructors to use them, because at the time there were no other closed-circuit rebreathers in Mexico at all. They were the first ones that even came to Mexico. And I started using them for exploration there as well. But they had limited application for exploration in Mexico at that time, to be honest. So the first exploration project I worked on was at the pit. And so I started exploring in the pit in 1999 through to sort of like 2000. And initially I was exploring with Dan Lins and Buddy Quattlebaum. And initially we were doing dives where we were just wearing a back-mounted rebreather, and we had open circuit bailout with us. But after a while, this just became a logistical nightmare. As we were pushing further into the cave, as our dives were getting deeper and longer, we needed so much open circuit bailout, both carried with us and staged throughout the cave, that it took like days to get everything out to the jungle, to set it all up, and then to clear up after the dive. So we had a base camp in the jungle. It would take us like a week, literally, to do 1 or 2 dives, like exploration dives, because all the rest were set up dives and recovery dives and everything else. I mean, the last few dives that we did that way, I had 39 tanks of open circuit gas staged through the cave. So, that's all there in case something goes wrong with your rebreather. Happily, nothing did, but, you have to have it there. So we'd have to get all this stuff out into the jungle. We'd have to get it all into the cave, and then we'd do the exploration dive, and then we'd have to get it all back. So it typically took 2 or 3 dives, both before and after the exploration dive, just to set everything up and then clear the cave afterwards. So, at that point, I'd already realized that the way to go was with like a double rebreather system. And so I actually took both the inspiration rebreathers I had, I completely dismantled them, and I built a semi-side mount redundant closed circuit rebreather. So basically I had like 2 O2 cylinders, 2 3-liter steel O2 cylinders on the right hand side mounted, 2 3-liter steel diluent cylinders on the left-hand side, sort of side mount style on bungee and everything else. I had one set of counterlungs over my chest, one set of counterlungs over my back, and I had both the scrubber canisters on my back. So it was kind of like sort of semi-side mount in the fact that the tanks were side mounted, but the scrubber canisters were on my back. A little bit like the KISS Sidewinder is set up now, to be honest. But this was, I had complete redundancy, so I had 2 complete breathing loops, 2 complete rebreathers, 2 sets of O2 cylinders, 2 sets of diluent cylinders, and I calculated that each rebreather gave me about 12 hours of total life support. And the last dive that I made in the pit, I extended the exploration line 1,000 feet beyond the end of Jill's chamber, diving this sort of like redundant semi-side mount CCR. And it was super comfortable to dive. It trimmed out perfectly. The buoyancy was great. It gave me a lot of peace of mind because I knew on my primary system I have 12 hours of life support. If anything goes wrong with it, I have 12 hours of life support on my backup system. Maximum depth of the dive was like 105 meters, about 340, 350 feet, something like that. And surface to surface, the dive was 11 hours long. And it just would have been impractical or not really feasible to do that dive on open circuit or even with a single rebreather with open circuit backup. So this is back in 2000 that I was actually diving a side mount rebreather system. Not completely side mount in the sense that some of it was still sort of like actually mounted on the back, the scrubber canisters. But the tanks I could remove and replace on both sides. And there were a number of restrictions on that dive that I was removing and replacing the tanks to get through.
And then now we have, like, the Liberty has it basically can be integrated as a bailout system, and you did work a lot with that,
Yeah, so to be honest, after those dives in the pit, where the rebreather definitely made a lot of sense because of the depth and the duration of the dive, I then spent the next sort of like 4 or 5 years exploring in Oshkosh with Bill Phillips, and we were diving sort of deeper cave. It was in the sort of like 60-foot range, most of it. We were doing long dives of 6 to 8 hours long, and we were using a combination technique there where we were diving CCR and open circuit side mount at the same time. So we had a back-mounted CCR, but if we got to an area of the cave where it got too small to proceed with a back-mounted CCR, we'd take it off, leave it behind, and continue open circuit side mount. And that worked really, really well. And over a period of 4 or 5 years, at the time Oshkosh was the world's longest underwater cave at 250,000 feet, we actually doubled the size of the cave. So we took it to over 500,000 feet in a period of sort of like 4 or 5 years, exploring that style. After that, I sort of switched to exploring in Saskatoon, and that was nearly all shallow stuff, and it was really, really small. So then open circuit side mount was the better tool to use there. And, I wasn't actually using a CCR at that point in time. And to be honest, Mexico is a horrible environment for CCRs. Because of the heat, the humidity, the ozone, the sunlight, and everything else, it kills them really, really quickly. So to keep CCRs up and running in Mexico is always a challenge. In the UK, it's easy. In other parts of the world, it's easy. But in Mexico, it was just an absolute nightmare. So to be honest, for that type of diving, the open circuit side mount was more rugged, more reliable, and suited that particular style of diving. Around about 2014, 2015, I started getting involved in some projects, a deep cave system down at Ishkalak that I was exploring that CCRs would have been perfect for, both to protect the environment and because of the length and the depth of the dives. Also an ocean vent off the coast of Cancun that was shown to me by Javier Salas and a friend of his. And we actually dove that open circuit to a depth in excess of 100 meters, and it looked like it went a lot deeper and there would be more cave to explore. At that point in time, I was like, okay, I need to start doing some more like CCR diving. But at that point, I really, really wanted to have redundant side mount CCRs. And happily, I didn't have to build one myself because they'd started to appear on the market. So the first one I looked at and experimented with was the SF2. I actually went to Germany. I did a course on the SF2, and I dove that for a while, but it didn't really fit my requirements. The problem with it is just the position of the counter lungs and the work of breathing. If you remove it, or when you change your orientation, if you're horizontal, the work of breathing is fine. If you're not horizontal, then it becomes a real problem. So over the next couple of years, I looked at various different systems. I looked at the KISS Sidekick. I looked at the Flex. I looked at the T-Rev. I looked at the Jockey. And to be honest, I'd seen, around about 2017, I think, I saw the first pictures of the Liberty. I was like, oh, that looks pretty interesting. And it kind of hit a lot of the sort of wish list I had for a side mount rebreather. First and foremost, in the fact that it was a completely self-contained unit, because that was important to me, because I wanted to have something that would be easy to remove and replace underwater. So I had onboard oxygen and diluent. So it looked fairly compact. I mean, roughly about the size of an aluminium 80. Obviously, looking at a picture is one thing. Looking at the specs, it was very impressive in terms of what you got, and the redundancy and everything that was built into it. But I wanted to have a chance to dive it, and I was lucky enough that Mike Neto, a friend of mine, cave instructor in Mexico, had a number of rebreathers, and he had a Liberty, and he allowed me to do a quick try dive on it in Ponderosa. That would have been sometime in 2017, and
I think we might have I think we might have a video of you swimming on it and rolling over and whatnot.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. So I mean, as soon as I tried it out, I was like, "Hey, this thing is fantastic. The work of breathing is great in all orientations. I can remove and replace it easily. It's a nice, clean configuration. It's completely self-contained with onboard oxygen and diluent, so I don't have to worry about plugging in off-board gas and everything else. So it makes it realistic to dive with two of these things, one either side, just as I would with open circuit side mount, because that was kind of what I was looking for. Now, this whole idea about keeping everything as simple and streamlined as possible. If I'm going to get rid of my open circuit, or if I'm going to start diving a rebreather, I actually want to get rid of the open circuit altogether. So if you have a failure with a rebreather, what are you going to do? You could switch to open circuit bailout, but that's a less than optimal solution. The best and most optimal solution is to switch to a redundant CCR. So having two side mount CCRs that are completely independent of one another, but have the same capacity and really not much bigger than aluminium 80 in a completely self-contained unit that I can easily remove and replace underwater, that was perfect. So pretty much from that first dive, I was like, okay, this actually fits most of my requirements. And so I contacted Divesoft and I bought two units, which I got, I think, early 2018. I picked up both units and sort of like started diving them from that point on. And great units, Of all the side mount CCRs that were on the market at that time, for my diving and for my application and for what I wanted to do, the Liberty was clearly the best unit. Because it had a lot of functionality in a very, very compact and clean configuration. And so I like that a lot. But like everything, it's a learning experience. So, I hadn't really been diving CCRs that actively for a number of years. And I hadn't dived a side mount CCR for quite a while. So I went back to the open water and I started just diving with a single unit for a while. In the open water, and I took it into the cave and started diving in the cave, and then I dove with two of them in the open water for a while, and then I took them into the cave and I dove two of them in the cave. Unfortunately, I had so many plans and so many things left to do that unfortunately it was cut short by my problems with DCS. But yeah, it would have been the perfect tool going forward for the exploration that I had planned and for the things that I actually wanted to do with it. So, I'm very happy with what I have had the opportunity to do over the years and the exploration I've been able to do. But as I said, that was a new toy. I was having a lot of fun diving with it, like learning about it, experimenting with it, finding out better ways to set everything up and configure it. And I was really looking forward to the future of exploration with it as well. And to be honest, although it was an excellent unit, wasn't perfect by any means. And I think there's a huge amount of improvement that could be made to the Liberty. And I was excited and keen to actually improve the unit as well.
Yeah, to build and grow with it. And
absolutely, because all dive equipment evolves and gets better. And as I said, I think the Liberty was the best side mount CCR out there on the market at that time. Probably still is, as far as I can see. Although I haven't paid as much attention the last 6 months or so as I was before, when I was still actively diving and everything else. And I'm sure you guys have updates and new things in the pipeline to improve the unit further. So that's cool.
Yeah, I know here at Divesoft, we're always diving the units and we're exploring and trying new things. I know I'm playing with using dual side mount units and experimenting with that. And that is also a big hot topic, is the bailout rebreathers. And this unit, you can tell it that it's a bailout unit, and it can monitor that. And so it's kind of growing into, so how do you dive a bailout rebreather? Is it a dual CCR or is it a bailout CCR? It's are you flying it just like side mount, or are you back mount and then to the side mount loop? There's a lot of different, it's another rabbit hole of getting into how you're going to fly it.
And I think that until you actually start going up there and diving it and doing this stuff and pushing the limits and everything else, you're not going to find this stuff out, right? And to be honest, my initial thought when I was diving the unit was that I would use it similar to my side mount open circuit, which was I would basically use one unit for 10-15 minutes and then switch to the next unit for 10-15 minutes and just keep switching backwards and forwards with them. And in those early days, they didn't have the software to turn it into a sort of a bailout unit. But then when you updated the software, and the unit could actually do a lot more in terms of like just being a bailout unit and sit there, then it actually makes sense in some scenarios, or a lot of scenarios actually, where you would just use one unit predominantly, and if you have a problem with that, then you switch to your bailout unit.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because to be honest, switching backwards and forwards constantly, it is a bit more task loading. It does obviously upset the loop volume and the PO2s and the loop and everything else. So now you've got sort of like two things to manage constantly, rather than having one that you're sort of like, that's just sort of in sleep mode almost, and the other one actually diving. So that simplifies things a lot. Probably for shorter dives, I would almost certainly be diving it as a single primary system and a bailout unit that's sort of like in bailout mode. For longer dives, I might be tempted to do my, first hour or two on one unit and then switch to the next unit for the next hour or two, and then switch back to the next unit for the next hour or two. So when you're getting up to dives that are sort of like 8, 10, 12 hours long, probably at that point you actually want to switch them occasionally. But, when you've got that length of time to just stabilize everything in the loop as you switch from one unit to the other, then that's not really an issue. But if you're doing a shorter dive, like a mixed gas bounce dive, and maybe you're only spending 15 or 20 minutes on the bottom, then switching from one loop to the other loop is probably a lot of task loading and takes away a lot from the rest of what you can do on the dive, because you do have to, give it the attention it deserves.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot, like you're approaching it based off the dive, and so it's there's a kind of a big rabbit hole in that. Well, we've been going for a while. I would love to show. We have a peace of mind video. It's an incredible video of you diving on the side mount unit, and I'd love to kind of close out with that. If we have anything kind of else to add, and so but we'll go ahead. We'll have Matt and we'll play the peace of mind, so we can we'll finish it off with that.
It's funny, but January 2009 was the first side mount video that HP and I posted on YouTube. And that kind of exposed side mount to a worldwide audience that had not been aware of it before. And that is one of the things that led to the huge explosion in the popularity of side mount. And then that video from January 2019 is actually the last video that HP and I shot together, because like shortly before that video got posted on YouTube was actually when I first got bent, which happened in December 2018. So it sort of like capped a 10-year period.
Wow. Yeah, that, I mean, that has a lot of significance. And then, you know, and you know, you've been kind of experiencing and going through a lot. And so, and I really think it's probably one of the most beautiful videos that I've seen of side mount diving and kind of diving in cave diving and the rebreathers and everything. And so it's a very, very good video.
I mean, a huge amount of credit for that has to go to HP, whose camera work and editing and everything else is fantastic. You know, just as equipment's evolved, diving equipment, so as like videography equipment, underwater lighting and everything else. But also, you know, his skills as a videographer, my skills as a model. You know, if you look at our early videos and compare them with some of the later ones, night and day. So everything is an evolution. Everything, hopefully over time, actually gets better, and you learn more and you improve and everything else. You know, including those videos. I mean, one thing that didn't change was when we started out making videos, the idea was to make artistic videos that showed the beauty of diving, because I mean, we both get so much pleasure from diving, and we wanted to try and like bring that to people who perhaps have never seen that before, or didn't realize that diving could be like that. And whether that's diving open circuit or closed circuit, you know, whether it's in the open water or in the cave, the philosophy was always the same. You know, let's show, hopefully, sort of like beautiful environment, but also graceful, easy, simple diving.
Right. Great. And let's see. Matt, I'll have it throw it up, and then we'll close the broadcast. Looks like it's lagging a little bit. Yeah, the video looks like it was lagging a little bit, but I want to make sure that everybody goes onto the YouTube pages, and the video is called Peace of Mind, and it's a really beautiful video. So.
Mm-hmm. I think it's actually one of my favorite videos that HP and I made together. And I should also mention that the good-looking diver in that is Divesoft, not me.
Well, you know, you have your infamous yellow helmet, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm the ugly one in the yellow helmet. She's the good-looking one in the black helmet.
Well, yeah, and you know, now that you mentioned how they have a 10 years apart from your other videos, it really gives it a lot of meaning to it.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I mean, it's been an exciting journey over that 10 years, and it was almost like a perfect storm. You know, social media started to get big. YouTube was available just as we started, you know, producing those videos and putting them on the YouTube platform and introducing the world to side mount diving. Something that outside of a very, very small clique of cave explorers, no one even knew existed. But now people from all over the world could actually see side mount configuration. They could see someone dive it in the caves. They could see someone dive it in the open water. And all of a sudden they were intrigued by it and also impressed with, I think, the beauty of it. And it looked like an underwater ballet. So I think that gave people something to aim for. And certainly to this day, you know, I still have people contact me to say how much they've been inspired by a lot of the videos that we put online, and how they've used them as a reference point in their own diving and for their own training and for things they wanted to achieve in diving. And, you know, I'm happy to hear that. And, you know, I have a passion for diving and also have a passion for teaching as well and for instruction, and to be able to inspire people, to be able to pass my knowledge on to people was always something I enjoyed very, very much in my diving career. So like I love exploring, I love diving in the caves, but I also actually got a great deal of enjoyment from teaching. And I also learned a lot from teaching as well, because I think until you know how to teach something, you don't really understand it fully yourself.
Exactly, yep.
And I learned so much from my students as well, because very often, you know, they would come up with new ideas or new ways of doing things, or they'd make a mistake that I'd never seen before, but it would make me think about things in different ways. So, you know, as much as I was the instructor, I was also learning from them as well.
Yeah,
so it kept it all fresh and interesting for me.
Yeah, you know, teaching it's its own reward, and you learn so much from teaching. And they also come in with a fresh perspective. You know, a lot of times we fall into our own biases and our habits, but they come in, you know, clean slate. And they're like, oh, well, let's try this. And I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I never thought about one
down. And I was lucky enough to be able to teach people who were already diving at quite a high level. So they came with a huge amount of experience, and they'd been, you know, they actually had exposure to many, many different instructors. They were probably instructors themselves. So, you know, it was a great opportunity for me to learn from these people, as well as for them to learn from me. And I relish that. And as you said, it's very easy to get stuck in a rut and to think your way is the only way, or that there is only one way to do something. And that's just not true. And, you know, most of the time you don't have time to sort of like just take courses endlessly from different people as much as you'd like to, because there's hundreds of instructors out there that I would have loved to have, like, you know, sat in on their courses and everything else, because I just like to see how different people teach different things. I think there's always something to learn from that. You know, the constraints of time and everything else don't allow you to do that, but you can get some of that from your students. But I think even as an instructor, if you can, it's really important to actually take a course yourself at least once a year. Learn something new, do something new. You know, obviously in diving as much as possible, but even then, if you do things outside of diving, it can also be illuminating and bring new skills to the table as well.
Exactly, and yeah, I completely agree with that. I took a fundies class last year, and I have thousands of dives, but it was a good learning experience to even do that. And so I was like, oh, nobody ever told me how to tie this knot or whatever, you know. So I had to learn.
I mean, it's not even just the skills that you'll learn, but it is also sometimes teaching style, or the way things are framed, or how training is set up. I mean, there's if you're passionate about teaching, and I was, then I love to see how other instructors like conduct their classes, how they structure everything, how they teach the various different skills, how they provide value for the things that they're teaching and everything. So again, just as my diving evolved over a period of time and my equipment evolved, I evolved and changed as an instructor, and I don't think any two classes I taught were ever the same, partly because no two students are ever the same, and I don't have a cookie cutter approach to training. I always try to make my training as personalized as possible, so it met the needs of the students I actually had in front of me. But also, as I learned more and as I became a better diver and better instructor, then it meant my teaching changed and evolved over a period of time as well. And I think that's the key to not stagnating. If you staying open-minded, and if you're receptive to different ideas and you're constantly learning, then you stay interested in whatever it is you're doing, and you're not going to stagnate. Because my opinion is, if you're not moving forward, actually you're not standing still, you're going backwards. You're actually getting worse. So yeah, I think that applies to pretty much everything in life, not just diving, but it's definitely very true of diving for me anyway, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now, you've been very kind of open and very transparent about what's been happening with you lately, with, kind of having, decompression sickness, and just all of a sudden, and apparently coming from very, not very exerting dives. And so it's, you're trying to figure out what's going on.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out, because I still don't understand it myself, and none of the higher back physicians I've spoken with today have been able to give me any clear-cut answers. One of the things I actually planned to do while I was in Europe on this trip was actually to have some more testing done. But obviously with the current world pandemic, that's just not possible at the moment. But I still do intend to do some more investigation, have some more medical tests done, and find out if I can find a reason for why I was getting bent on, comparatively benign dives where, there were no predisposing factors. It was basically, the dives were very shallow, very simple. There was no mandatory decompression stops in any of them. They were very conservative. So, I shouldn't have been getting bent. So there's obviously some underlying physiological issue that I have going on in my body. Today, I haven't been able to find out what that is. But I actually think that there's a bunch of different tests that I can still have done. Today, I had a transthoracic echocardiogram done, which showed that I was clear for any type of PFO or heart shunt. But I since learned that you can get a lot of false negatives with just one PFO test. So I probably also want to have a transesophageal test done. I want to get a transcranial Doppler test done. And also the way the test is conducted, that can possibly lead to a false negative as well, depending on where you have the agitated saline solution injected. So I had it injected into the arm, and that can potentially bypass the heart, and you're better off having it injected into the veins in the thigh. So that's something that I want to pursue. And as I said, I did intend to do that while I was here in Europe, but obviously, given the current situation, that's not been possible. But when things go back to normal, I am intending to carry on with this sort of investigation and see what is possibly wrong. Maybe there's some kind of fix I can get for it, because I would actually still like the opportunity to make the occasional dive. I mean, I love diving very much. After 30 years, it's hard to walk away from. And although I'm probably not going to be able to go back to teaching and diving as I had in the past, I would still, if possible, like to have the opportunity to actually just make the occasional fun dive for myself, even if it's like fairly shallow, fairly easy stuff. Because I love being underwater, but I don't love being underwater and then spending 5 days in a chamber afterwards. So until I find out what the problem is, I'm unfortunately stuck on dry land.
But I think, I commend you for being, so like transparent about it, because there is a stigma with decompression sickness. But as we're seeing here, you can have undeserved hits. You can do everything right and still get hit. And so it's still a theory. It's not an absolute.
I mean, obviously diver denial is the first sign of,
I can imagine, all of a sudden.
The thing is that, yes, there is a stigma attached to getting bent. It's unfortunate, and there shouldn't be. Even if you get a hit, even if you made a mistake and you got hit, people make mistakes. We all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. So there really shouldn't be any shame associated with that. I mean, if you're out driving your car and you make a mistake and you have a car accident, are you ashamed of that? No. So I think, it's best to be completely open and honest with this stuff, because the more information that's out there, the more chance there is that someone maybe has an idea and can help you, or it advances decompression theory, because decompression theory is still something that we're attempting to come to terms with. I mean, it's not really a hard science at this point in time. 1/3 black magic, 1/3 guesswork, 1/3 science. I think obviously I have a fairly visible position within the community, but I have absolutely no problem whatsoever telling the whole world that I'm human, just like everybody else. I've made tons of mistakes over my diving career. I've screwed up lots of times while I've been diving, and you know what? I've been bent. I don't know why I got bent. I'm trying to find out why I got bent. Hopefully that can help me, but hopefully it can also help other people. So, honestly, there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to hide. And I wish that everybody should feel completely comfortable and open about discussing any medical issues they have that are diving related, because that can only sort of help the general knowledge of the diving community.
It really can. It can really help the community, and that's what we are. It's we are all a community, and you do have a very important. You've had an important role, and you still do, I think. And so it's.
Thank you.
I think even just doing things like this are important for everyone and for the community and whatnot.
Well, to be honest, it was eye-opening for me, because when I originally posted about my situation and what had been happening, I mean, one of the puzzling things for me was that I didn't really know anyone else who had been through what I've been going through. And so I was thinking, okay, this seems fairly unique. This is really strange. But a lot of people contacted me privately to tell me they had pretty much similar situations, similar story.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm not talking about just 3 or 4 people. I'm talking about tens of people contacting me privately saying, I started to get bent, don't know why, I don't know what the reason was, age-related, cumulative damage-related, whatever, but I just decided to stop diving. So, a lot of those people, I mean, maybe they told people close to them, maybe people in their local diving club knew about it and everything else, but most of them don't have the same sort of profile that I have, or the same platform that I have. So I think that it's gone unreported for a very long period of time. But there is definitely a group of divers out there that are getting on a bit in their diving career, and a lot of them tended to be instructors who've done a lot of diving over 30 or 40 years, and they're getting up there in age, they're in their 50s and 60s, and all of a sudden they're starting to run into problems with decompression sickness for no apparent reason. And whereas I thought, okay, I'm the only one, it turns out I'm not. It turns out there are actually quite a few people out there that have had the same issues. And I think it's something that actually hasn't been studied in the dive community up until now. So I think that this is, again, an opportunity for some of the physiologists, for some of the hydrobac physicians and everything else, perhaps to actually look at this and see, is it something to do with aging? Is it something to do with the amount of diving you do over a period of time? Is it something to do with your diving history or diving behavior during that period of time? Is it something to do with the environment you're diving in? Because all of those things, I think, are potential factors. If I look at my diving history, I would say that knowing what I know now, I wouldn't dive the same way I did 20 or 30 years ago. I would have been a lot more conservative. I think that diving as much as I did for as long as I did, I probably did get some cumulative damage over a number of years. There's a fair number of times where I've walked away after a dive, and I haven't had overt signs and symptoms of decompression sickness, but I've had a certain amount of decompression stress on my body. Looking back on it, I would say that probably over the last 2 or 3 years, post-dive fatigue, things like that, I've noticed a little bit more post-dive fatigue, for example. I just put it down to I'm getting older. But maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was just like, as I'm aging, as my physiology is changing, now it's making me, more susceptible to decompression stress. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand. It's not a hard and fast line. And if you're standing on one side of it, you're not bent. And if you're standing on the other side of it, you are bent.
Right.
It's much more of a gray area. And so every time you dive, your body will experience a certain degree of decompression stress. And most of the time, that stress is not enough to give you any overt signs and symptoms of decompression sickness. Sometimes you're going to go too far into the decompression stress zone, and you are going to get overt signs and symptoms of decompression sickness, and you have to go to the chamber and get treated. But a lot of us, and particularly the instructors out there and the people who are diving regularly, and particularly if they're older, are probably in that decompression stress zone where it's more than they really should have, but not enough to actually cause them to be bent, or let's say to actually cause them to present at the chamber. But you are doing damage to your body, and maybe that can build up cumulatively over a period of time, and eventually, it's going to start causing you problems. Now, the other issue for me is the environment I'm diving in, which is very shallow cave that has very, very sawtooth profiles. So anyone who's done a cabin dive in Mexico knows what it's like, how many ups and downs you do, in a very, very short period of time. And, most of the dives I was doing, like maximum depth, sort of like 40 to 60 feet. So in the region of sort of like, 15 to 20 meters, average depth around about 10 meters, 30 feet. But they're quite long dives. They're like 4, 5, 6 hours long. So you're actually getting quite a lot of tissue loading. And then during that dive, you're doing multiple ascents and descents during the dive. And now I had a scooter for that as well, where with the best will in the world, yes, every time you come to an ascent, you should stop your scooter and you should swim. But I'm human like everyone else, and I'm too lazy half the time. And it's too much fun to just stay on the trigger and, okay, it's not that high, it's not that far up, it's not that much. And so you just scooter up and over. And maybe doing years of that has had a deleterious effect, on my body. I remember reading an article years ago where Dan recommended you make no more than 3 ascents in any one day's diving. And they didn't mean all the way from the bottom to the surface. They meant any significant ascent during the dive.
Wow.
Because obviously it leads to microbubble formation. And I just laughed because I'm like, I make 30 or 40 ascents in any one cave dive that I do, where I'm going from, 10, 12 meters up to 2 meters, back down to 12 meters, up to 3 meters, back down to 10 meters, up to 6 meters, continuously throughout the dive. And yes, it's shallow, but it's also the greatest rate of pressure change, that first 10 meters of the water column, And so particularly if you're doing multiple days of diving or multiple dives during the day, and you're diving day in, day out throughout the year, and you're doing these long dives that are 6 hours long, and you're making all these ascents, I think there's probably quite a lot of microbubble formation happening. And let's face it, none of the tables, none of the dive computers, none of the diving physiology or decompression science is based on that kind of diving. Nearly all of it is predicated upon doing square profiles, which, as we all know, is the best type of profile you can make, going deep and then working gradually shallower. Well, the environment that I'm diving in and that many other cave divers are diving in doesn't allow you to do that. So I would, at this point, a word of caution. If you are a cave diver, particularly if you're getting older, and if you're diving in this type of environment where you're having to make multiple ascents, then do everything you possibly can to make sure that you are buffering your safety. So that means using nitrox. It means slowing your ascents down as much as you can, realistically and feasibly. It means taking days off between sort of like dives and, rather than dive sort of like 8, 10 days in a row, maybe split it up a little bit, making sure you're well hydrated before, during, and after diving. And if you want to have a long career, you just have to take care of yourself as much as possible. As I said, as much as I was aware of this while I was diving, and I was aware of it, and I was using nitrox, for example, and I tried to treat my body well, I still think over sort of like 20 years of very, very extensive, cave diving, where I'm diving pretty much every single day and doing these long dives, it was perhaps just like, it builds up stress on your body. Anything you do, I think diving is a healthy activity. I think it's good for us. It's good for our mental health as much as anything else. It's good for our physical health. But anything you do to an extreme, and that could be typing, it could be ballet dancing, it could be anything, it wears your body down. And I did actually dive to an extreme. So have I done underlying damage to my body over those years and years of diving? Yeah, probably, almost certainly. But I'm sure there's some other underlying physiological cause as well, whether that's a lung shunt or a heart shunt. I don't know yet, but that's why I want to have more testing done and find out.
Well, I mean, this is so much to think about and so much to put together, and I know the entire community as a whole wishes you the best in finding.
Thank you.
And so it's and when you're thinking about those ascents, at NASA we would do 1,000 ascents from 40 feet a day, we were doing crazy bouncing, and so but we were breathing 50% oxygen, and so it's so many factors, and but it does a lot of stress on your body, and who knows, is that maybe there's a certain real lifespan of doing that stress on you. So
if you look at the groups who get bent the most, it's not deep divers. Yes, you can get bent going deep diving, but it's fish farm divers who are diving very shallow, but they're doing multiple ascents in a day, and it's open water instructors who are diving shallow but doing multiple ascents in one day's diving, and probably lots of dives, and probably lots of days in a row. So those are the groups of people who are actually getting sort of bent with the highest degree of incidence. We respect all diving. The fact that it's shallow, that absolutely does not mean that you can't get bent during a shallow dive. You can, absolutely. Yes, obviously you've got to respect the 90, 100-meter dives, but you also need to respect the 10-meter dives as well.
You need to respect each dive, So
absolutely,
Well, Steve, it was fantastic having you. We had so much to talk to you. I think we need to have a second episode where we can have you again, and so we can dive even deeper into some other topics and whatnot.
Sure, I'd be happy to come back and talk with you guys again. Maybe you can have a look at some of the questions people are asking and add those to the next talk.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for everybody watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our next videos. Be sure to share it on different pages and whatnot in your own, so we can make sure that everybody gets to see and enjoy this, because it's definitely a rare opportunity, right? That we just get to talk about diving.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for inviting me, Joe. It was a pleasure talking with you, and hello to everybody out there listening. I hope you enjoyed it and got something to take away from it.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.